Hello, hello, hello. This is the Harbor and Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative take about the world around me. Turn this off real quick. Alright, so feedback is giantly important. Feel free to reach out to me. Alright, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on Spreaker, I'm on Spotify, I'm on Pandora, I'm on iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Pandora, just to name a few. Alright, so this episode keeps in line with the theme here. And so I'm going to talk about the aspects of fishing and the history and the aspects of that. Also with my point of view about everything with it. Here we go. Alright, so I myself personally, I have a different perspective about the aspects of fishing and everything else. And so can't stress enough about the aspects and everything else when it comes to that aspect of knowing where the history and the linear aspects of where everything, how it started, originating, where everything comes from. So, okay. Me growing up, it was quite interesting, living in the Gulf, near the Gulf. And, there's specifically when you talk about fresh fish, seafood, it's right there. And then, as I stressed, when my parents, where they come from Louisiana, they have even more a different point of view about the aspects of seafood. Now, I wish when I was a kid that I did have the experience of fishing. Personally, I didn't. But I was fortunate enough that when I met my husband, he taught me, he was teaching me, and was still learning. And, then, pass that on to our children by fishing and the aspects. And so, I don't know, something's really, really different when you get into that point of view about fishing and culture and understanding and knowing where everything comes from, and when that expands out into civilizations, and it's starting out as the aspects of necessity to do things to survive, and then it expands out to a business and so forth. That's something to consider how unique that is when we are thinking and expanding on the aspects, when something like fishing is, the bottom line of it is really a valuable skill to have to survive, to know how to do these things. And also when you get in the aspects of what type of fish are good as far as the sources that it provides, and then when you go on the other side of it and being environmentally aware of it, actually being environmentally aware of things and being rational about the aspects of environmental awareness. knowing and understanding and learning and expanding on the aspects. For instance, with fish and mercury, and how does that impact, humans and their consumption of it. Alright, so with all this said, I'm going to jump right into the facts about fishing in history. Here we go. Alright, so, of course, all the sources will be provided. Okay, so bear with me. Even though this is recorded, I guess you can say in that perspective, on demand, posted after the fact. This is pretty live what I'm talking about here. Okay, I just had it to do what happened. Okay. Okay, here we go. Well, pretty much, I'm not in the business of editing to make things this is, pretty much the abridged, the unedited, even though it's edited, if that makes any sense. Okay, so fishing has been an essential activity in ancient culture, with evidence dating back tens of thousands of years. Early humans in ancient civilizations based their daily living around sources of fresh water, and fishing was a crucial source of food for survival. Spear fishing with harpoons or barber poles was common, as was the use of nets. For instance, the ancient Egyptians used woven nets, harpoons, and hooks to catch fish such as Nile perch, catfish, and eels, as depicted in tombs, carvings, and papyrus scrolls. Okay, hold on just a second. Alright, this is another clue into the aspects of how important fishing and water and it has to do with civilization. So important enough that it was depicted on Egyptian scrolls and everything about the life in which they were living, as a guide in itself to inform people about the flourishment, the development, and the process of how their civilization was going. And something as prevalent as minuscule as it's seen now, but you gotta also in this day and time, it seems like you should revert back to the importance, specifically with the types of foods that are being consumed in grocery stores. How, very affluent that can be when you have those skills and you have that knowledge to be resourceful like this and be able to catch what you eat and fish and know and understand that skill. Alright, so similarly, the ancient Greeks and Romans wrote about fishing and recorded images on vases, paintings, and mosaics. Alright, so the Neolithic culture and technology speared worldwide between 4,000 and 8,000 years ago. And with it came basic forms of the main fishing methods are still used today. So Native Americans of the California coast were known to engage in fishing with gore, hooks, and line tackle. And some tribes use plant toxins to induce torpor and stream fish to enable their capture. And see, I think it's quite interesting with the aspects of particularly, when we get in that business of saying, oh, one minority is, we have to focus in on, uplifting them. Okay, so riddle me this, Batman, or riddle me this, y'all. So, how is it, I'm sitting, particularly with Native Americans and going on all of the, African, and then African Americans, say all these poor Native Americans, oh, they don't this, they don't that, and then same, narrative storytelling with all these Africans or African Americans, oh, this, they don't, this. But there's a lot of proof and documenting and evidence that says otherwise. So it's one of those things. How about if you want to, talk about facts, inform people, really inform people, then do it. Just state things for what they are, what happened. Really, get your hands in the mucks and really, reveal it, really show it for what it is, not just from some preconceived notions or a narrative that you want to tell. I think that's much better to do. Okay, moving on here. Alright, so in ancient India, the forgive me for the pronunciation of that, Harpanasas used copper harpoons for fishing. And earlier hunters in India, such as the Minikopi people, used harpoons with long cords for fishing since early times. Fishing was not only a means of subsistence, but also had cultural and religious significance. So in ancient Egypt, the Nile was full of fish, and fresh and dried fish were a staple food for much of the population. The Egyptians invented various implements and methods for fishing, which are clearly illustrated in tombs, scenes, drawings, and papyrus and documents. In ancient Greece, fishing scenes were rarely represented in art, reflecting the low social status of fishing. But there is a wine cup from around 500 BC that shows a boy crouched on a rock with a fishing rod in his hand and a fishing trap in the water below. The antiquity of the Gillian technology is documented by a number of sources from many countries and cultures. Japanese recorded traces of fisheries explorations, including guillotining, over which dates back to over 3,000 years. And Native American fishermen used cedar canoes and natural fiber nets, attaching stones to the bottom of the nets as weights and pieces of wood to the top as it floats. And Sealand Islands, which were settled by Norsemen during the Viking era, fisheries shared cultural and technological similarities with the Norwegian fisheries, including gillnet fisheries for herring. Fishing also played a role in trade and economic activity. So by the 15th century, the Dutch developed a type of seagoing herring drifter that became the blueprint for European fishing boats. This was the herring bus, used by Dutch herring fishermen until the early 19th century. So in the 17th and 18th century, cod became a major commodity in the New World, forming trade networks and cross-cultural exchanges. Recreational fishing also has ancient roots. So the first mention of recreational fishing dates back to the 15th century and comes from the essay treatise of fishing with the angel. Fishing with the Angel by Dame Gillian Berners. This was the Benedict of Soapwell Nunnery. This type of fishing became popular during the 16th and 17th century and was performed on the rivers and lakes. The development of motorboats in the 19th century led to popularity of big game fishing. So Dr. Charles Frederick Holder considered an innovation of branch of fishing. And see, it's quite interesting how even stuff that is considered to be recreational has a history and a lineage. Because truly, when you get down to the mist, excuse me, when you get down to the midst of it, it's important to be original. But also in originality, become even more original and more significant, and everything becomes more important when you know for a fact where all the originality came from. Alright, so with all this said, I'm going to dig in deeper and get some more facts and wrap everything up. Alright, here we go. And feel free to, if you want to expand out and read more on the sources that I will provide for you, feel free. So ancient times. So fishing hasn't always been a part of human life. There was a time when humans lived by simply collecting things that they came across in nature. However, once they moved from unplanned gathering to systematic food implementing, fishing showed its fence. In the beginning, the same tools and weapons were used for hunting and fishing. Alright, so for that reason, it is often difficult to identify certain artifacts as exclusively fishing tools that could indicate the prominence of fishing in the lives of early humans. It is believed that the first fishing attempts were those of Neanderthal men who did not use any tools. Catching fish was a bare hand instead. As you can assume, there was no practical evidence of this, only numerous primitive sites located near rivers. Mommy, what, baby? I'm hungry. Hold on, let me finish, okay? Located near rivers where fish could be, let me say that again, where fish would be very flourishing, and rock berries and caught with hands. More prominent evidence dates back to 50,000 to 400,000 years ago. That was when equipment made of wood, bone, and horn replaced stone-made tools. Archaeologists found indented pieces of bones and horns dating back to that period that were supposed. Hold on, Kate, baby. Baby, hold on just a minute. Let me finish. Were supposedly used for hunting and fishing. The traditional looking ancient fishing hooks appeared in the Megalithic period around 9,000 to 6,000 BC. Hold on, sweetie. They lacked barbs, but featured the button-like welding at the end for fixing. Nets made from willow, lime tree, bass with stones, stinkers floated and made of pine, wood, and birch bark. Improved harpoons were already used by fishermen somewhere between 8,000 to 5,000 BC. So, Middle Ages and medieval advancements. So, the period of the Middle Ages spans from approximately 5th century to 15th century. Began with a fall of the Western Roman Empire and ended with the Age of Discovery. Though the time gap between ancient and medieval time is quite formidable, like a formality that is, there is little information on the status of fishing at the time. This period is exclusively applicable to the history of Europe. So, there you go. Medieval advances. No particular new method of fishing were introduced within the last couple of thousand years. Even fishing rods which weren't the original tools for fishing, were already used in Egypt in 2000 BC. Fishing net, traps, and liners were invented even earlier than that. What people did was not inventing but improving. So materials changed for sturdier ones, and design were becoming more and more complicated. So that's really implemental to understand, people weren't trying to reinvent a wheel, because if you get in the process of trying to reinvent a wheel, you're not really flourishing in the aspects of what you need to do to achieve your accomplishment. And that's and I appreciate when people understand that concept, especially when they're, talking about facts and getting to the source of the matter of everything. Fishing rods, together with fishing hooks, underwent several considerable improvements. So hooks had their form. Leave that baby alone, okay? To a more efficient, sharply curved one that modern anglers use. So rods began to feature guides through which fishing lines could. I need to wash. I just told my husband that I gotta wash because I got something to do. So I have a load that I gotta take care of. And I just told you I'm trying to record. Sorry about that, folks. All right, so fishing rods, together with fishing hooks, underwent several considerable improvements. Hooks and their form changed to a more efficient, sharply curved one that modern anglers use. So rods began to feature guides through which fishing lines could be fed. This novelty allowed for more secure mounting of fishing lines that used to have one point of contact with the rod. Another major change was length, and configured by the end of the 15th century. So rods became longer and more durable. Multi-section collat rods also appeared. So the technology advancements of the high Middle Ages brought new technologies of boat building and on-sea navigation that allowed fishermen to venture further into the sea where larger schools of fish dwelt. So larger fish nets were then mandatory to increase the catch volume, and the increased number of fish caught encouraged the advancement of new preservations and technology. So fishing and religion. And so, when you get in that aspect too of talking about what's more, pure, more religiously more appeasing to eat, that's something to consider too with food and how that is implemented in our society. All right, so Christianity was a big deal in the medieval Europe. So the point of being a dominating institution that dictated to people the rules of life. Monarchs derived power from alliances with the church and vows to protect it. The church was also free from taxation mostly, which allowed it to accumulate money and power. Monasteries weren't only the place of learning, but also important centers of economic activity. One of the tools that the church used to control people was introducing bans and taboos. No part of human life was accepted, from including diet. The church prescribed abstinence from meat on Fridays to commemorate the sacrifice of Jesus. The practice was established quite early, but gradually the number of fasting days grew. At some point, people were to fast on Wednesdays, Fridays, Saturdays, the days of Advent and Lent, and other holy days. So according to the historians, they estimate medieval Europeans fasted about 40 days of the year. So this couldn't but shape what we now call the fishing industry. So fishing reels now is a vital component of the rod assemblies, and were not in a wide use until the second half of the 17th century. So, fish was a natural solution for people who were banned from consuming the meat of warm-blooded animals. So the demand for fish was very prominent. That encouraged people to pursue fishing, and it wasn't only about the catching fish in natural bodies of water. People began to create fisheries, with the first examples dating back to the 11th century France. Hold on, sweetie. But even before this time, the focus was both on consumption and commercial fishing. So the surplus of fish was initially sold to local townsfolk. With time, people ventured to sell fish in more distant cities. Fish markets were an integral element of the rise of early exchange sector that would have developed at a much lower pace and encouraged the church. All right. Baby, I have one more thing to do and then I'll fix it, baby, okay? All right. So the modern era. Here we go to the modern era. The modern era took place in the Middle Ages, and the period is not as extensive, but witnessed rapid advancement in many spheres of life. We still live in this age, and the difference between life 400 years ago and now is jaw-dropping. The period applies to Western history in general. So much of what is said is relevant to the U.S. The advent of the Industrial Revolution, just like religion and the governs which was used. It's one of those perspectives. How you see it? Does it still, some people still have a perspective, but depending on their faith, that is still used as of today. But the main consistence, not as much as it used to be, as far as religion and rule on people and society. All right, just like religion and used to govern lives in the Middle Ages, the Industrial Revolution defined the way people lived from the Middle Age to the 18th century. Technology advancement of the Industrial Revolution shaped the world we live in as of today. Every sphere underwent changes, especially production industries. So the fishing industry benefited greatly from the new invention, but the ramifications were also numerous. The most significant change in the fishing industry was from the schooners to steamboats. Before steam engines came into being, schooners were the primary type of vessel. And surprisingly, steamboats were much faster, which are loaded with the merchandise equipment that they bought, as a significant increase in the supply of fish. In turn, spurred the advancement of catching and processing the techniques more effectively. So as a result, the Industrial Revolution such features a preservation. Methods of refrigeration. So, and then quality control, and an enhancement in transportation, which received a major boost. However, the economic impact was mostly significant, and it was a contribution to that. So, industrialized fishery created many job opportunities, generating wealth, and contributed to domestic and foreign exchange earnings. So, fishing became more efficient. So, leisure and activity. The fishing tournament, also known as derbies, appeared in the late 1930s. So the rule of derbies are simple. Anglers compete with each other in the amount and the quality of fish So each is assumed to be scored and sometimes accounted for the quality and characteristic of fishing and gear and its involvement. So, what's the conclusion of all this stuff? Fishing has been accompanied with people for every step of their evolution and journey. For the primitive bone hooks and the multi-section and fiberglass rods, it attributes and it illustrates the different stage of human inventiveness. So fishing was supported by the church and benefited from the Industrial Revolution. So the latter increased the volume of fish and related resources but caused significant damage to the environment. So it has power to restore the balance and make sure that sustainability prevails over the thirst for money. Alright, so what is my point of view? And I'll end on this. Okay, so it's one of those means to an end thing, you know. And it also goes into the aspects of business practices too, you know. There is such a thing as slowing down and scaling down and, you know, figuring out that so it's more apt to being more resourceful with Mother Nature or with the natural earth here or with nature in itself. But there is a rule of thumb to consider when there's pressure, demand, and something is working to get it done fast and quick, and efficiency really goes out the window. And that's something to really consider about the aspects of when people say this, you know, point of view of the almighty dollar and impact of the environment. You know, sometimes you got to see things for what it is, and then when you see things for what it is, what is your disposition to do something about it rationally instead of getting on your soapbox and just screaming about it, you know, or, you know, smearing your thumb, oh, you're this. What and rationality can be done. And then, you know, working with everything to implement that if that's what you really is your call of duty, so to speak, that you want to do with your impact and your purpose in life. That's something to be considered too. Alright, so with all this said, I'd like to know what you all think. Okay, baby. Feel free to reach out to me. And this reaches the end of the Harbor Light. Tune in. You're hungry. Tune in. Turn up. And take care. Say bye to the nice people.
Bye.
Bye-bye.